I'm glad to welcome you to the first open session of the course on employee turnover. The topic is quite important and relevant for many companies. It's about reducing employee turnover in the company. Today we'll discuss what employee turnover is and its causes. Here's our course website. If you want to learn more about this course in detail, you can go to the website and take a look, in case it happens that we haven't met someone yet. My name is Mike Pritula. I've worked in various companies, but in terms of turnover, it's interesting that at Alpha Bank, while working as a senior or lead recruiter, even back then I was already analyzing employee turnover. It turned out that it was my responsibility to analyze all the turnover in the bank, prepare conclusions, implement exit interviews, and so on. And then, of course, in other companies where I worked, I dealt with turnover analysis. In my work, I rely on global best practices. Here's a list on the screen of the ones I regularly follow. By the way, we'll be mentioning some of them today. And I'd appreciate it if you could write a little about yourself, your city, position, and company. Those watching on Facebook can write there. This is so we can get to know each other and understand who's interested in the topic. Okay, I see Olga from Kharkiv. You've written, you can also add your position and company. So keep writing and I'll move on so we don't have to wait. Once you write, I'll read out your information. Those who are already in the course, homework awaits you. Homework is necessary to receive a diploma. Today is our first class of the course. Today we'll talk about the main causes of turnover and what it is. In the second class, we'll discuss how to measure turnover. In the third, how to conduct research. In the fourth, how to develop a reduction program. In the fifth, how to implement it. And in the sixth, we'll summarize the results. Okay, Olga added that she's an HR manager at Web Meridian Company. Great! Thanks for writing. In today's session, we'll talk in detail about the following. This is a study of the reasons for turnover and job searching worldwide. We'll discuss the main causes of turnover, how turnover is related to satisfaction, loyalty, motivation, and engagement. We'll talk about how companies measure engagement and how to automate the measurement of turnover. This is our plan for today. We're talking about turnover today and throughout this course, but in case not everyone understands how it's calculated or what it is, I'll show you the formula. Turnover is a metric that shows the rate at which employees leave the company. Most often, turnover is calculated for a year. For example, you can calculate it for 2019. It's calculated as the number of people who left, for example, last year, divided by the average number of people who worked last year. In other words, you knew your average head count. This is all expressed as a percentage. If your head count changed during the year, you take the arithmetic mean for the previous year. Usually, this is calculated as the sum of the total number each month divided by 12. That's how turnover is calculated. And usually it's expressed as a percentage. The minimum is 0% if no one left. The maximum can be up to infinity and 100% in some industries. For example, the restaurant business where people leave frequently, that's what turnover is. In terms of understanding turnover, it's very important to know about different studies. It's important to understand what global research tells us, what people who participate in such studies say, and fortunately for us, such studies exist. Moreover, studies in Russian are available to us. For those who are not native English speakers or not comfortable with it, you can study these. Course students will have access to these studies in additional materials. For everyone else, I'll show the main points from the studies in today's class. So we'll be relying on two studies. One of them is a study by the Restart Company, which covers all countries of the world. It's quite extensive. Restart is one of the leading consulting firms in Europe, with their office located in Amsterdam, if I'm not mistaken. The second company is a well-known recruiting firm that conducted an excellent study in Russia. Thus, their study is most relevant to countries like Russia, Ukraine, Belarus, Kazakhstan, and other Russian-speaking countries, because, as various studies show, our main points are similar. That is, analyzing studies by Deloitte, Mercer, Globe, and others, for example. We always see that Ukraine, Russia, Belarus, and Kazakhstan are quite similar across various indicators. So what do these studies tell us about important, interesting issues such as employee turnover and its causes? Let's start with the first question. Did the respondents look for a job during the year? Notice how many people were looking for work. 42% said yes, they responded to interesting offers, but weren't actively job hunting. And only 25% said no, they weren't looking for a job. 33% were actively job searching. These are the ones who in fact mostly changed jobs. We'll see this in another study. So turnover is really something that affects every company today. People are very mobile now, very mobile indeed, especially during a crisis, during global instability, as the current year 2020 shows us. Everything is changing very dynamically and is unstable. People are becoming even more mobile in this world. Because as soon as they see any risks to themselves, they try to protect themselves. Let's move on. Have you considered changing your field of work? Notice how many people are thinking about this. 57% of people said yes, and only 39% said no. Can you imagine? So people are thinking about where to move next. What was this related to? And now here are the reasons. Reasons that will be closely related to the topic of turnover. These aren't direct causes of turnover. We'll discuss those later. 34% discovered a talent for another activity, 28% became disillusioned with their profession, and 26% decided to start their own business. The rest were to a lesser extent. And when asked if they had considered taking a career break, 48% said yes. Can you believe it? So people, this is really true, and my experience confirms it. Today, people are starting to think not only about work, but about some kind of work-life balance. And for employers, this is also something to think about, especially for those companies where the balance between work and the rest of a person's life is not very harmonious. That is, people are putting a lot of effort into their work and see nothing else but work. Let's move on. What else do the studies say? The reasons for job searching are relevant to what most interests the employer company that's thinking about reducing turnover. Reducing turnover is primarily about retaining those who haven't left yet. In terms of reducing turnover, the company might be more interested in finding out what could make those who haven't left yet leave, rather than finding out why those who left did so. Although both are useful. Let me reiterate. From the perspective of analyzing turnover, it's important to understand not only why people left, but also why those who haven't left might leave. Because those who have left, we can't retain them anymore. Those who haven't left yet, we can retain them. By knowing what might make them leave, we can change the situation. So in terms of what might make people leave the company, 46% were not satisfied with their salary. As we'll see later in other studies, salary is indeed a major factor today, specifically in our region, but not worldwide. I'll say right away, in countries with higher average incomes, salary becomes less and less significant as a factor. So I see a direct correlation between the average wage level in a country and its significance. The lower the salary, the more it affects all aspects of work. And vice versa, the higher the salary, the less important it is for a person, because he begins to think about other things. Further, there was no career development opportunity in the second position. Also, the second point, and also according to a lot of the research I've read and my internal research in the company, it's really one of the most important points. The third point, it's close to the second point. While the second involves a change in position, the third involves development in the current position. Sounds like there was no opportunity to develop professional skills and learn new things. The top three items that scored over 30%. All the others are less likely to have forced a person to look for a job. Next, what might hold up in the current company? Yes, we are in this course. We are going to talk about doing research within the company, finding what in your company can make people leave, how you can retain employees. But what global world research tells us is that people in their current company can be retained by a 71% higher salary. So people are interested in earning more, and that in terms of just retention works. 53% promotion. Basically completely overlap the first 2 points with the reasons for the search. 36% in interesting projects, and 32% the possibility of relocation abroad. That is, the possibility of moving sooner or later. Indeed, the migration mood in Russia, in Ukraine, in Belarus among employees is quite high. People are thinking about it, and in principle there is a high level of migration, and people are actively thinking about it. Well, let's look at one more item. Still a small gap between fourth and fifth, the expansion bonus package. It is the bonus that is actually the same money. That's what can keep people going. Perhaps it was now that you saw the main reason in the paycheck. You saw the paycheck as the main element of withholding and you thought, but that means we close this book, we're not interested, we can't raise our salaries. Now here's what I want to point out to you. Indeed, many companies fail to review salaries because the business situation is not favorable. The company is not that profitable, business is not growing in the current year, for example. I realize that it's a known thing. This doesn't mean that the company should now relax and just lose people and accept the turnover. Why? I'll explain. Aside from wages, which are important, we see it all over the charts. There are other items besides wages that are not that far out of whack. For example, career advancement in the first case, a difference of 4%, in the second case 18%, but while the numbers are quite large. That is, a company that does not have the ability to renegotiate wages, to raise wages, is left with the tools to retain employees. That means if your salary is rigidly fixed, I've encountered that. I went through a crisis with the company when the dollar doubled, and the company couldn't renegotiate wages for 2 years. We have managed to keep the current one within reasonable limits. For example, we had a fluid 16%. We kept it at 18%. Didn't let it jump to 25 or 30 or 35%. That is to say, you can hold on to it. Here we see common things. How exactly in your company can you improve employee retention, reduce turnover? We'll learn this in later sessions because it requires researching your company's situation. I'll show you the tools, I'll inform you, I'll pass them on. We'll do everything. We're moving on for now. As we familiarize ourselves with what's going on in the world and around in our company, let's move on. What are we respondents willing to sacrifice for a pay raise? Ready to recycle? Good news for the company. If a department is underutilized, it might be a good solution to increase the workload of existing employees and give them a raise, rather than hiring another person. The top 3 things people are willing to sacrifice are the office, meaning its location and workplace equipment, and they're willing to give up only part of their benefits package. And the next 2 would completely give up their benefits package. And they're not willing to sacrifice anything for a pay raise. Also 21%, it's still important to understand that it's not quite to say, come on, let's give people a raise and just give up on training, benefits, and everything else in the office and so on. Well, it's not a very good strategy. Next, did employers make counteroffers to current employees? 47% answered yes. And here's my next question for you. Tell me, does your company make counteroffers to employees when they say they want to leave or bring offers from other companies? So those watching on Facebook can write on Facebook, and those watching on Zoom, please write in Zoom, plus or minus. If your company has this practice of making counteroffers when a person is leaving, like, let's pay you as much as they're offering you, let's pay you that much here. Put a plus sign for that. Ah, I see. Oh no, the company doesn't do that. For some companies, of course, it's a matter of principle not to do it. Sometimes we do, but rarely. Second answer. Interestingly, did employees stay with the company in the year following the acceptance of a counteroffer? 81% said yes. If you're considering counteroffers, they work. That's what the statistics say. What do employers most often offer when making counteroffers? Well, obviously a higher salary and a promotion. Sometimes it's an expansion of responsibilities and other factors to a lesser extent. So I see Christina has also responded with a plus on Facebook. Okay, so the company does it and it works. Indeed, such a tactic exists. Let's move on. Another study, this was Hayes, you can see it down here. Another very interesting study looks at what people are looking for, what they pay attention to when searching for a new job, and how this changes over time. Good pay is also here. This is a different survey, a different company, with a different geography. It's worldwide. Good pay is in first place. Work-life balance is second. Job security is third. And a pleasant work environment is fourth. I want to focus here on job security. What it means. It's that the employee understands they won't lose their job with this company. This means that the company has a stable position in the market, predictable working conditions, timely payment of wages, clear, transparent principles for evaluating performance and dismissing employees. This is what people want, especially now when the world is very changeable. If a company can guarantee stability, it might be more attractive than companies without stability, but with slightly higher salaries. Let's move on. The main reasons for turnover. There we looked at people who were changing jobs, considering jobs. Here, specifically about those who clearly changed jobs last year. So 19% of people worldwide changed jobs last year. This means that the average turnover rate in the world is 19%. If you're looking for something to compare yourself to, however, there are differences across regions. The most active region, where people change jobs the most, is Russia at 23%. That is 4% higher than the average. Then we have North America, Latin America, Europe, and the Asia-Pacific region, 17%. This is in fact what we can compare ourselves to. But this is general. Next. For what reason? Why did people change jobs last year? Low wages? Again, this is worldwide data. While we previously focused more on Russia, Julia, this is last year's data. In other words, a report like the one we're looking at today is prepared over the course of a year. When this year ends, there will be another report for the year 2020. Until the year is over, we're familiarizing ourselves with the fully completed previous year. Yes, 2019. Last year was 2019. For now. So, low wages account for 39% and lack of career prospects for 37%. The first 2 points exactly match the company's research we looked at earlier for Russia, only the percentages are slightly different there, but the first and second points are the same. The third point globally is the lack of work-life balance. So these work-life balance, well-being, and other programs are already showing up here. If people can't see a life beyond work, they leave. Lack of opportunity to stand out is 28%, and lack of recognition for achievements is 28%. I can say that in fact the last 2 points largely depend on the managers. Therefore, we can say that the role of the manager is very significant here. Next. Now those who are planning to change jobs. So 4 out of 10 people planning to change jobs will stay. This is what can keep people in the workplace. And if they receive good pay, balance, and job security. Again, job security is one of the top 3 factors here. Interestingly, it used to be less significant. That is, if we look at job security in 2019, and in some years it was even more important. The last few years have been very crisis-ridden, so people are looking for job security. That's it, it's not here. Next. A pleasant work environment is what keeps people, along with career growth. Here again is career growth, which people leave the company for if it's not there, and what keeps them in the company if it is. Let's move on. Now the differences by country. Here I've listed those countries for you. This report has countries and our stats has even more. Again, students of the course will have it in full format as well as the research. Well, we can compare. So I'm sure and I see that we have data here from Russia and Ukraine. Unfortunately, there wasn't much data on Belarus and Kazakhstan to present them as separate countries. But I'll repeat that very often. The analysis of Russia, Ukraine, Belarus, and Kazakhstan shows that the assessments are very close. Even here, look, for example, Russia 79%, Ukraine 79%. In Russia 27, Ukraine 26. That means Belarus and Kazakhstan will have minimal differences in percentages. So if you're not from Russia or Ukraine, just look at either of these two countries, and you'll likely have the same situation. Yes, there's no data for Kazakhstan. That's exactly what I'm saying. Kazakhstan can confidently look at Russia's data because it will be very similar. So here's what we can highlight about our countries. Good pay is even more important in our countries than in others. 79% in Russia and 79% in Ukraine. We don't see such high percentages anywhere else here. Romania at 70% is the closest country. Work-life balance here is at 27% for us. In Russia and Ukraine, they are less important. That's why in the Hayes study, which we looked at earlier, there wasn't such an item. What else differs here is financial stability. Please note, 59% in Russia and 48% in Ukraine. The factor that is less prominent in other countries, our candidates and employees demand it. Interesting work is also noteworthy. Russia 48%, Ukraine 45%, while in other countries the difference is not so big. The only exceptions are Sweden and Norway. In some countries, interest in work is not as important. But the other indicators are more or less similar to other countries. This is what employees want. Next, the connection between turnover, satisfaction, and motivation. So there is a very strong correlation between turnover, satisfaction, and motivation. Because people who are dissatisfied with their work, people who are not motivated, they will leave. So let's look at the most important material factors that demotivate professionals. Here's another company study. The non-material factors will be on a separate slide. Let's take a look here. In other words, what material factors can demotivate people? Insufficient salary level is at the top of our list here. The second is late payment of wages. This is a very interesting point because wage delays do sometimes occur in our countries. I hear about this sometimes. This is a significant demotivating factor. If this happens, people will be inclined to leave. Moreover, there are different nuances. According to the law in many countries, like Ukraine, Russia, and Belarus, wages can be paid up until about the 10th of the following month, and an advance payment is required. Some companies pay like this. For example, when I worked at a bank, Alpha Bank, we had a really great payroll system. We received exactly half of our salary in the middle of the month. That is, we worked for 15 days. I started at the beginning of the month, worked for 15 days, and then I received an advance. Maybe not 50%, maybe 45%. And exactly at the end of the month, I receive the remaining balance, so I don't have to wait for the beginning of the next month. However, I know that many companies do it differently, paying a minimal advance and paying the salary on the last possible day they can. That's a downside. So I don't understand how the percentages are distributed here. It's not out of 100. Each indicator, it doesn't add up in the end. Yes, Julia, in surveys like this one and others, the scheme doesn't work in the sense that a person is given a list and told to choose only one item. Usually they're given a list and asked to choose several items. So it turns out that 80% here means that out of all the people who were given this list, 80% chose this item as important to them. Meanwhile, 20% of people who received this list did not choose this item. In other words, a person could only choose what really demotivates them. That's the reporting methodology. Yes. This is a common technique in this kind of research, especially when there are many items, so reduction of bonuses or premiums. This is a factor that will come into play or has already come into play in many companies this year. I would like to draw your attention to the fact that reducing bonuses or premiums really does demotivate people and can indeed spur an increase in turnover. In other words, people may leave more actively. Therefore, when deciding not to pay bonuses or premiums, predict what will happen, what the reaction will be, and what you can do to balance things so that people don't leave. Note the fourth item, fines. This is something that, of course, is not accepted in the world, something that is essentially outside the law. Companies penalize through bonus withdrawal. In legal terms, this is called bonus withdrawal because fines are prohibited. We are talking about official payments. Where payments are unofficial, fines do actually occur. This demotivates 50% of people. And one more significant point, the others to a lesser extent, is the lack of health insurance. This demotivates people. Now let's look at what non-material factors can demotivate. Also very interesting data. 70%. For me, for example, it's quite expected. I was surprised that this item wasn't in the international HR study. Incompetent and ineffective company management. In other words, a manager who is not up to their position, to put it mildly. In second place is an unfriendly corporate culture. There's a concept called toxic corporate culture. It's where it's constantly accepted to attack each other, lash out, insult, offend, snitch, and so on. Manager's personality 56%, conflicts with colleagues 47%, lack of career growth opportunities 42%. And then the items are listed in descending order. Basically, there are many more factors here with a more even distribution. While the first 5 points were prominently featured, here all the non-material factors gradually decrease, except for the first one, which is significantly larger. I recommend analyzing these demotivating factors in relation to your own company. For example, to what extent is each of these factors present in our company? Are we doing this? Are we helping employees prevent these issues from occurring? If any of these factors are present, or if you're not helping to address them, be prepared. I think you're already seeing high turnover, and if you're not yet, it's likely to make itself known soon enough. Today we're covering the main points, but of course it's important to analyze all aspects. Because today we're looking at national or global averages, but in your company, certain factors might be more significant. We'll discuss this in future sessions. How to conduct research and what's actually happening in your company. Because your employees will, to some extent, be similar to employees in other companies, but they'll also be unique in their own way, with their own nuances. Next, let's look at demotivation from a gender comparison perspective. Lack of opportunity to work from home. 25% of women, 19% of men. These are indicators where there are significant differences. Some indicators show no significant gender difference, while others do. Conflicts with colleagues concern men more. Men are more concerned with their supervisor's personality and lack of challenges, while women are more demotivated by excessive control from supervisors and public criticism or reprimands. These are some interesting statistics. Let's move on. The connection between turnover and loyalty. We've discussed satisfaction and motivation, so we can see that there's a connection, and what specifically affects loyalty, according to the numbers. Does loyalty to the employer exist? 51% say yes, it does exist. Which is actually good, because if the majority said no, it would be quite sad. 26% answered yes, but it can't be constant. 18% said no, I don't believe in loyalty to the company, but I do believe in loyalty to the manager. And the other options are very underdeveloped. Next, in terms of how loyal people are, from not loyal at all to very loyal, here's the distribution of ratings. Most responses, 22%, fall between 8 and 9. It's more like 8 as the number 10 drops off here. If any of you are familiar with the loyalty questionnaire called NPS, you probably know that scores of 8 and 7 mean the employee is neutral towards the company. Scores of 9 and 10 mean they're a supporter or promoter of the company, and 1 to 6 means they're a critic. Here we see a situation where only 22% are in this category, and here it's even more than 22%. So overall, the loyalty index is more negative than positive, which also doesn't improve employee retention in the company. How do professionals define loyalty to a company? What are people saying? 48% believe that loyalty is dedication to the company, even during challenging times for the business. It's the majority, almost unanimous, but everything else is much lower. 17% say high quality work and enthusiasm, and 11% find it difficult to answer. It's interesting to compare this with how companies understand loyalty, which is usually when an employee is willing to work with the company for a long time. In principle, there's some overlap, but there might be differences in some areas. And another important element related to turnover is its connection with engagement. This is another important point that companies are paying special attention to today. In terms of analyzing turnover, comparing it with satisfaction, motivation, loyalty, or engagement, today companies are more focused on understanding how turnover is related to engagement. Why? Because today, engagement is becoming a universal indicator of many aspects and elements within a company. So what do the studies say about engagement? We have a leading company in this field, Gallup. Their research shows that only 30% of people worldwide are truly engaged. Unfortunately, this is a low figure. Moreover, companies with engaged employees have 25% lower turnover rates. So in addition to everything else, besides higher customer satisfaction and higher productivity, there's higher profitability and many other positive factors for companies with engaged employees. But especially in terms of turnover, engagement is of great importance. Let's move on. So the Gallup questionnaire that measures engagement is called Q12. I'm sure most of you have already heard of it. So let's see, put a plus if you're already familiar with this tool, and a minus if you're encountering it for the first time today. Those watching on Facebook can also respond. I see your responses and will take them into account when analyzing how many people answered. Okay, I see minus Olga Yulia. Thank you. So what does our dear Facebook tell us? Well, yes, if there are two minuses, it's definitely worth explaining. She commented with a minus. If there are mostly minuses, it's worth going into more detail. The Q12 questionnaire was developed by Gallup. Gallup is one of the leading consulting companies in the world. More specifically, it provides various services to clients. These services are mainly related to improving business efficiency, and I see Ira put a plus. And probably one of their most famous products is the engagement survey. Their engagement study involved a huge number of people worldwide. We're talking tens of millions of participants. Their engagement questionnaire is notable for having only 12 questions. It's one of the most concise, which makes it very convenient to work with. And the Gallup engagement questionnaire, it is scientifically grounded in that the company has been researching engagement for many years. They compare engagement with effectiveness and understand that where there's high engagement, there's also high effectiveness. That is, they've conducted statistical analysis and found correlations. That's why today the Q12 questionnaire is one of the very best. For those planning to use the questionnaire in their company, I've added a link here. You can click on it, go to the address, and create a copy of the questionnaire for yourself. So, if we look at the engagement questionnaire, Gallup highlights 4 questions that are related to turnover. These are 4 factors. If these questions are answered positively, if employees, not candidates, say that yes, everything is fine, then turnover will be lower. Conversely, if there are problems, the turnover will be high. Here are these 4 questions. The first question is, do you know what results are expected of you at work? This is important. If people don't know what's expected of them at work, there's a high probability they'll quit, not understanding what's wanted from them. The second question is, do you have all the materials and equipment necessary to do your job well? In other words, the resources that enable you to work. The third question is, does your manager or anyone from your colleagues care about you as a person? And the fourth point is, do you believe that the mission and purpose of your company help you realize the importance of your work? These are the 4 questions. How do they explain this? So here we have an explanation for each of these 4 questions. For example, the first one, yes. Do you know exactly what results are expected of you at work? Gallup says that this question is a strong predictor of future turnover, among other indicators. If people don't know what's expected of them at work, you should expect an increase in turnover. At the end, the last point, this description indicates that today we're, getting a first look at the topic of turnover, so we'll be very brief today. It specifies exactly what the company can do to improve the situation in this area. For example, start setting goals for employees on a regular basis. For instance, using the OKR method, objectives and key results. That is quarterly, with all the nuances of this system. The second question also has a strong correlation with turnover. It's about the availability of materials and resources, as it's extremely difficult for employees to work if the company and management don't provide the resources needed for effective work. The third question is also related. Here, Gallup says that companies with problems in this area have a 37% higher turnover rate. In other words, when managers don't take care of their employees overwhelmingly respond that no one cares about them. And in such companies, according to studies, turnover is 37% higher. And the fourth point is about having an understanding of the company culture, why the company exists, what it does, and how I fit into all of this. Fit in. Here, Gallup says that employee turnover in companies where everything is good is 15 to 30% lower than in other companies where there's no understanding of what the mission or purpose of the company is. This is the relationship that exists between engagement and turnover. What's also interesting is that besides Gallup, which has been conducting research for many years now, Google also conducts good research. For example, Google conducted a study on what's needed for effective teamwork. And here too, we can notice many things that we've already talked about today. For example, psychological safety, team members' interdependence, structure and clarity, the meaning of work, and the impact of work. So I want to summarize the factors that affect satisfaction, motivation, engagement, and turnover are very closely interrelated and intertwined. A company that starts to work systematically towards improving the situation regarding these factors. It's not just fighting turnover. This is good news. If you're thinking about how to reduce turnover, the good news for you is that, in addition to reducing turnover, if you work on these factors, you'll get many additional side effects, such as increased satisfaction, engagement, and so on. A question from Julia. Does Google conduct surveys and research only on their own employees? Yes, only on their own. Google doesn't do it externally. They have over 200,000 employees today in more than 100 countries worldwide, so it's enough for them to understand the situation, but they're not particularly interested in other companies. So Google does this only for itself. Moving on, it's important to track turnover regularly. It's important to measure it. Many companies unfortunately don't measure turnover. I encounter this often. I ask students, and when I conduct webinars, not all companies calculate their turnover rate. So I recommend at least starting to measure it. Companies usually also have some tools that help calculate turnover. Even financial tools like 1C or SAP can already calculate turnover. That is, you can generate a report, customize the report more precisely, and the turnover rate will be known. There are companies that implement tools like BI, business intelligence. They implement Power BI, Tableau, Google Data Studio. I recommend including turnover reports there as well. And HR also has its own system called HR Automation System, HRIS. Human Resources Information System, where turnover reports are also most often built in. Here's a question. This is only one sector, but where can we look at different sectors? Julia answers the question, you're interested in turnover in different sectors. The most accurate data on turnover in different sectors comes from salary market surveys, from paid practices or HR practices of companies such as Hay Group, and also Ernst Young. In some industries, Hay is better represented in some industries, while Ernst Young is better in others. It's best to buy a report from them. You'll see not only turnover rates, but also a lot of other information. So the second question from Olga is, how appropriate is it to structure an exit interview based on the Q12 questionnaire? For factors not related to salary. Olga, we will definitely be discussing exit interviews in this course. To some extent, you can ask questions from Q12 in the interview. It needs to be supplemented with other questions as well. Okay, let's move on. So I'll show you an example of how this works in HR automation systems. There is, for example, a system called PeopleForce. It's in Russian and has many modules. Right in this system, there's turnover analysis, information about hires and terminations. The beauty of an automation system is that if you or your company use them, you don't need to build anything yourself. Today, many systems allow you to not just analyze turnover, but to analyze it by reasons for termination, by types of turnover, arrange it monthly, compare year to year, export reports, and so on. That's why I'm a huge advocate for automation systems in general. So, if your company isn't using an HR automation system yet, the issue of employee turnover is another argument in favor of it. In other words, I try to demonstrate the usefulness of HR automation systems in all topics. From a turnover perspective, it's also very useful to have such a system. I mean, you can do all of this there. You can see it all. Now, homework for those who are already taking the course. Today, it's quite simple. We're not delving deep into the causes of turnover research and so on today. Today we're looking at causes in terms of percentages. Today we're keeping it very simple. You need to answer a question. What are the main reasons for staff turnover in your company based on the data you know? Describe how you learned about them. What sources you might have used. Maybe if you have exit interviews. And again, your expert opinion. What do you think your company could do to reduce turnover? These are easy warm-up questions for now. We'll have more specific questions later. These are the kinds of questions. As for books, there isn't a well-known book that focuses solely on employee turnover, especially not in Russian. However, there are books related to company culture, employee motivation, or employee experience. Here they are on the screen. I recommend familiarizing yourself with them if you haven't read any of these. Give them a read. You can determine which book to read first, second, third, fourth, and fifth based on their size. I recommend studying these books. With this, we're concluding our first introductory session, where we've studied the main causes of turnover globally and in our countries. In the second session, we'll discuss in detail how to measure turnover in a company, what cross-sections to use, and what tools to employ. In short, we'll dive deep into this topic. With this, today's session is coming to an end, and I'd be grateful if you could briefly write what was most valuable for you today. What are you taking away from this? What benefits are you deriving for yourself? Maybe you've had an idea. You can write it as feedback. It's always interesting and useful. For those watching on Facebook, I would appreciate if you could like and share. For those who will watch on YouTube, you can also like there, so I would be grateful. And overall, thank you very much for being online today, for being interested in these topics, for wanting to improve human resources in your company. Because every human resources professional working in a company affects an average of 100 employees. Thus, each of you can improve the lives of 100 people, even if just a little bit. So thank you for that. Feedback from Julia. Thank you. I learned about many new factors that can cause employees to leave and what might be important to them. Your presentation is great. Thank you very much, Julia, for the feedback. And thank you for your questions. Thank you, Olga, for your questions. Julia and Olga asked questions today. With this, I am concluding today's session. I invite everyone to take the course because the topic of turnover is really important for business. So this is an opportunity to save a huge amount of money for the business. Here is Olga wrote the main reasons for turnover in the world and the factors that are important for an employee. Got it. That is it, friends. Thank you very much for the feedback, for your participation, course participants. Until the next meeting in exactly 1 week. I look forward to your homework assignments. That is it. Bye-bye. See you soon.